Hey everyone, welcome to this first discussion I've had in a while about Cloud Foundry. I think it was earlier this year. I was talking with Chip and he's like, there's changes afoot. And I was like, well, I want to hear more. And as a lot of people may know, the Cloud Foundry Foundation has been around for quite some time. And now though, it's taking on some new direction for us. To learn more about that, and all you listeners out there, you're going to get to hear from Amelia Downs. Hi, Amelia.
Hello, Alex.
Amelia is a staff software engineer at VMware. She works on the Cloud Foundry networking. She's the Cloud Foundry networking lead. And also joining us is Eric Malm. Hi,
hey,
Eric.
Alex.
Good to see you. And Eric is product line manager at VMware, and he's a member of the technical oversight committee for the Cloud Foundry Foundation. Stephan Merker. Hey, Stephan.
Hi, Alex.
Good to see you. And Stephan is a product expert at SAP. He is also on the Cloud Foundry Foundation technical oversight committee. He's a member there. And Porte. Hey, Lee, how are you?
I'm all good, thanks. How's everything going your end?
Very well. And Lee is a reliability engineer at gov.uk on the PaaS team. He is the chair of the Technical Oversight Committee with the Cloud Foundry Foundation. So we're going to talk about the future directions for the Cloud Foundry projects, including CF on virtual machines, Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes, build packs, Basha, the governance. And so maybe, Lee, we can start with you about, tell us a little bit of how, the organization is going to change and how that's going to affect how developers and engineers can get more involved in the project. Because it does lead to some changes that I'm expecting is trying to decrease some of this friction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the fundamental change that we're making is moving away from the project groups and having 4 PMCs that sit above the different project group areas to having the single technical oversight committee and 8 different working groups underneath that. The working groups themselves are going to have a larger remit in terms of projects that fall within their sphere, but it should make changes across multiple different components of Cloud Foundry an awful lot easier. And one of the other major things that we're really doing is getting rid of the dojo approach in order to become a member of a team, because that was something that was a really good onboarding experience, but it made it inaccessible to smaller companies and individual community contributors to the community, because it required a very heavy time investment and a monetary investment as well. Instead, we're looking for regular activity within the different components that interest individuals in order to gain that access.
Yep, actually, my team has worked since, let's say, end of last year on the area of the cloud controller, because we have here some scalability problems on our very large, or I would even say huge landscapes. And I'm looking really forward to this new approach, because it would make it easier for us to join in, to contribute, to maybe even become a committer in these projects, which was near to impossible in the past.
Yeah, and I think from the perspective of people who've been driving that community for a long time, that's exactly the kind of participation that we want to encourage and to get with the community, is making it way easier for all of the organizations that are invested in and contributing to Cloud Foundry projects to have natural, convenient channels to contribute that don't have that high barrier to entry, like Stephan had mentioned.
Yeah, and as a current PMC or lead for networking, I've just been leading this small little area of networking, and I don't even know how many groups or projects there are right now. And I'm excited about this smaller number of groups, because rarely do you do a feature that just touches networking, right? It might touch Cloud Controller and Diego and networking and Garden, and having these smaller logical groups will really help us, I think, work better together.
You bring up Diego, you bring up Garden, you bring up the Cloud Controller, and you have a focus on networking in particular. What are the goals that you're seeing for the Cloud Foundry Foundation and for the developer teams that you're building?
Yeah, I really see this as a time where we're resetting our goals and recommitting to the CF for VMs. And so some of those things that we're going back and doing is HTTP2 support, always hard to say quickly. So H2 support. And that'll be exciting. So that's Ingress H2. We've been hearing from users that they really want to have apps that speak gRPC. And so I think this will be a huge win. And then of course, there's other security things like TLS 1.3. There was a bug in Java that didn't allow, Java clients to talk to Golang servers based on their reading of the RFC spec. And now that Java has fixed that bug, we'll be able to get TLS 1.3 to everyone. I think those are some of the exciting things that are coming up.
So access to gRPCs, gRPC is always an interesting topic to discuss. Who really can talk to that? Who can talk about access to gRPC and why that is becoming a matter of interest? Let's just speak right up.
Well, I think as we see that landscape of applications on Cloud Foundry and other application PaaS is evolving, that protocol on top of the evolving HTTP spec is becoming more and more popular. And especially as more and more people are adopting microservices, and they want that kind of responsive communication between those microservice components running on the platform. We're just seeing the interest in and popularity of that protocol increasing. And so there'd been some debate in the community about how to do that. A couple different efforts to get it started, but we think we've got it figured out now, and that's moving forward in the community.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty essential way of continuing with microservices development and fitting that into what really the core of Cloud Foundry is doing, which is running your large-scale applications a simple experience for your developers. And as we think moving forwards, protecting that developer experience is the really essential thing that we've got to maintain all the way through.
That's always been something that has been of real importance to the Cloud Foundry community. It's that developer experience. And one of the things that's been difficult, I think, over the years has been, how do you do that, but also think about Bosch, right? And learning Bosch is, a real challenge. How are you all addressing Bosch? What is the thing that you're looking at with Bosch, and how are you thinking about it? And is it still the core? Is it still the focus? And one of the points of the dojo was to give people an opportunity to learn, Bosch. So, how does this, new direction actually kind of change that, or does it not?
Well, I think we still see Bosch as being the foundational layer on top of the VM-based infrastructure. So, even thinking about the principles that we've tried to build Cloud Foundry on technologically around declarative workflows and idempotent operations, Bosch is really an exemplar in that area of the stack. And so I think we see wherever the community is going to need to run software on VMs, Bosch being an important part of that. And that's where we're continuing to invest there as a community. We just completed getting the transition to bionic stem cells on the Bosch layer done, and we're wrapping up, firming that up on for the CF app runtime and CF deployment as well. And so that's giving that operating system component of Bosch the next couple of years of longevity, and we're already talking about the transition to the next Ubuntu long-term support version as the next wave of stem cells, and really thinking more deliberately about that transition as well.
I think sometimes I forget about how powerful Basha is because it's just been in my life for, it's what I've been using for the past 5.5 years, 6 years. But yesterday I was ramping up a brand new engineer on my team, or she had just, come to VMware. And she said at the previous company she was at, they SCP'd up code and then they stopped their server and started it again. And that's the solution that they were doing for deployments. And so getting to show her Bosch and like see it from a newcomer's eyes again, just feels great, like how much power it has and how we can continue to use it for CF for VMs.
Yeah, I can only second that because all our big installations, they all run on Bosch, and Bosch is doing the heavy lifting here. And it helps a lot to have idempotent and completely automatic deployment pipelines to take care of all the lifecycle management. And for the end user, it doesn't matter, right? The end user uses the API, the CF, CLI tools and add-ons on that. But that the whole stuff is running smoothly, scaling, it can be managed. That's something we rely on, and it's also important to continue the investments here because it's a long path until one thinks about migration or whatever is the next big technology that can handle this workload and find a way from the existing landscapes into this next big thing.
Yeah, I guess it's a really interesting one for you, Stephan, given the size of some of the clusters that you're actually running there. The idea of moving from Bosch to Kubernetes as that underlying abstraction, is it something that you've actually thought about how to attack that sort of a journey and that type of migration path?
So a lot of teams at SAP have thought about that. Personally, I work more on the Bosch part, but let me maybe give you some numbers to so that we all understand what I'm meaning when I say a big landscape. So I'm thinking about something like 600 Diego cells, 80 terabyte of memory, 150 cloud controllers, 60 routers, 100,000 orgs. This is a big landscape, and this one comes to its limits, even within the, let's say, Bosch-based deployments. And that's my daily fight, more or less, find some regressions here, some problems there. And yep, you won't migrate that one by one to Kubernetes. That's completely out of discussion, but you have different deployment models. And for me, the key aspect, beside all these technical problems that you have there, is compatibility. So for the application user, it must be a no-brainer to take the application and deploy that on the new. It should just be as simple as changing the API URL. But that's not the case as of today. There are tons of bigger or smaller problems when it comes to the feature set that is supported, when it comes to different build pack technologies, etc., etc. And also detail behavior in runtime aspects that are slightly different than here and there.
So that leads to a good question about the intersection of Bosch and Kubernetes. And, Stephan, what I'm hearing from you is that, like a lot of organizations, you're looking at Kubernetes where it makes sense. And there's a lot of challenges that come with Kubernetes, that you need to think about. Cluster management is becoming one of the bigger issues that people face. And that becomes a networking issue overall, for the community. And Amelia, I'm curious from your perspective, you have this networking expertise, and you're the chair of the TOC networking committee. What are kind of the ways that you're thinking about this interconnectivity between, there's these Bosch-based environments and these Kubernetes environments, and where does Cloud Foundry fit?
Right, so the components that I work on, your favorites, your Go routers, your CF networking. It's really interesting as we look at that migration from CF for K8s to whatever we're doing, CF on K8s, CF for K8s, anything on K8s. Because the networking is so much different, right? We're not porting these components over. And so we're having to think about it completely from scratch. And so I think it gives us a new opportunity, just to think about what we want to change. And I think it would be really great if we could interact with those other communities more, like Istio is extremely powerful. And how could we use something more like Istio and Envoy and latch into their powers to, plug into Cloud Foundry and give our users even more options than they have now.
Yeah, I think we're seeing also a lot of interest in that, different ways that say apps running on CF can interact with apps running on Kubernetes. And I think that we've even got some of the technical underpinnings laid out even on the VM side. For years we've been running Envoy as a proxy alongside app instances for various reasons, even just internal security. And so that's even one potential avenue for integration with other service meshes like Istio to provide deeper cross-environment communication and compatibility.
Lee, as the as the head of the TOC, you were elected to this position. And how have you been answering these questions when people are bringing them up? How are you approaching these matters? Because there's lots of organizations, for instance, that are, on VM-based environments. I mean, it's hard to imagine who is not, except maybe for the very youngest of companies out there. So, what have you been saying to the people out there? What would you say to listeners out there about what about these matters, and how are you talking to people about it?
So we're only 4 weeks into the TOC, so we're very young as far as these things go. We're just starting to feel our way in. But thinking about it in terms of my own user base, we have a continual dialogue around what their specific needs are and how we can best solve them. So at the moment, CF on VMs is solving those problems based on all the research we've done, but we're about to start a big piece of research to look at what the future of hosting looks like for applications across government for the next 5 years. I think that's going to show some really interesting things. I get a funny feeling that there's going to be some pressure towards looking more towards functions as a service, as ways of reducing costs. And at that point, CF for VMs may not make the most sense for us. It might be CF on some form of Kubernetes in some way, shape, or form might make better sense. But it's going to be one of those things where it's really got to be use case driven by the end users as to the correct direction in which to go. As Stephan's pointed out, there's absolutely no problem with running a Bosch-based deployment at what I would call a huge scale, quite frankly. So it's not that we're hitting the upper limits of it, but it's the key thing is, does it meet your end user needs?
I hear developer experience over and over from you, Lee, how it meets those end user needs. I'm really curious about topics such as build packs, which have really had a resurgence as of late. Who would like to talk about build packs? It's an interesting topic that I find. And specifically, there's this new project, Paketo. Is that how you pronounce it? And
I think that's how you pronounce it.
Okay.
Yeah, Paketo. Yeah,
Paketo. What is Paketo, and who's leading the TOC that group that leads Paketo? I think I saw who in the group here is really kind of taking the charge on Paketo, or is it all you?
I think a bunch of us have context on Paketo. I don't know that any of us is as directly involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a project that we started, I believe it was early last year, as another part of the foundation, and really focused on taking the success that we've had with the language-specific build packs in Cloud Foundry and bringing them into the cloud native build pack era. So that cloud native build pack specification is something that we've been working on in the build pack community for the past few years. We've had a lot of contributors from VMware, previously Pivotal, and that, but also other folks from the larger build pack community, primarily Heroku. We're really stepping back and thinking, what's that build pack experience that takes full advantage of the wave of technology that we're getting from things like the OCI image spec standardization and the operations that apply to that. And so, I think really over the past 3 years at this point, we've been seeing that get firmer and firmer and more solid. And Paketo is now building on top of that to take those same popular languages for cloud native applications, and to give them great default build packs that are easy to use wherever you can run cloud native build packs.
Amelia, build packs, provide that framework and runtime support for applications. They do a lot of work in determining, what the dependencies are to download and how to configure the apps to communicate with these so-called bound services. And I'm borrowing here from the documentation on cloudfoundry.org. And one of the things is when you do CF push, you can automatically detect an appropriate build pack. How do build packs fit with Kubernetes? And because, we're used to thinking about containers as doing this kind of work.
Yeah, Kubernetes will absolutely still be using build packs. Eric, correct me anything if I'm wrong at this point. But and they'll be using the cloud native ones, which are, have a lot of benefits about knowing which dependencies you're using and, tracking to make sure everything is up to date. And I think that similarity of the build pack experience is one of the things that will help users go from CF for VMs to whatever on K8s when they're ready. But I think the other exciting thing about K8s is how build packs can be used for the components as well that are running, because if your components are just Kubernetes workloads, you can get that same build pack experience for them. And like the same, oh, I know what dependencies are running and I know what versions are running in the same experience.
Yeah, I think one thing we see is that cloud native build packs actually solve a major problem with Kubernetes, because Kubernetes starts with running a container image as a workload, but there's still the problem of how do you get that container image? I mean, we've seen for years that it's not productive for everyone just to be using Docker files. They're unmaintainable. There's no metadata that comes out on the image that tells you how to make that process reproducible, what's actually in the image, and how to secure it. And so cloud native build packs really fill that role of saying, you didn't want to start with a container image. 10 years ago, we didn't have those, but we've had source code. How do you start with your source code and build the deployable artifact that runs on Kubernetes and runs on any of these systems that understand OCI compliant images?
Well, one thing that I still find difficult with the build packs as of today is that in the VM-based deployments, you have the old world build packs, while on Kubernetes, you have the new shiny Paketo build packs. That raises a question again about compatibility and migration. It would be really cool if you could have the new Paketo build packs also on the CF deployment distributions on the VM-based Cloud Foundry installations, so that users can already start to migrate to the new build packs today and do the step to Kubernetes at least independently, so that you do not have these big bang migrations. That is something I would like to see in the future.
Yeah, I'm definitely not surprised that that's something that you want to see with the sort of scale that you're working at. The idea of switching around with a big bang or having to handhold migrations through, it would be truly terrifying.
Yeah, we had a meeting recently with some of the project leads in the TOC, and I think it was you, Stephan, who mentioned, like, we want to keep the build packs together, right? The old build pack world and the new build pack world, so that we can make that migration story, so that they can work together and plan that migration story.
So what's the difference between the old and the new build packs then?
So if you look at the slate of the build packs that are, say, bundled with things like CF deployment and the cloud native build packs that are part of Paketo, you'll see that there's, at this point, I think roughly the same set of language versions, but there's a few differences in terms of, say, some of the source code structure that those build packs are looking at. I think maybe like the PHP build pack is one of the ones that has a significant difference. Like it's actually looking at something like an htdocs directory for files instead of at the root of the files that are pushed. So I would say, by and large, there's maybe like 90-95% compatibility, but there's a few little rough edges there. And we know, though, that app developers don't want to have to think about those kinds of things. They just want to know, okay, I did those tweaks to get my app running on Cloud Foundry. I'm not thinking about it in terms of, a Cloud Foundry that's using the V2 build packs that we've had for forever, or that are using the new cloud native build packs, V3. And so continuing to identify and chip away at those inconsistencies or incompatibilities, or as Stephan mentioned, taking the new cloud-native build packs and actually being able to run them where there are significant differences in the VM's architecture. Those are both very important priorities for the community.
Let's look at build packs in particular, and I think Lee was about to say something, but maybe let me just finish my thought. Where do you need the help? And how do people get involved? And how are you setting it up to make it easier? I think we touched about it a little bit, but let's just think about build packs in particular, for instance, because there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done to help both these VM-based environments and these new Kubernetes environments, and how you're going to make them compatible, as Stephan has been discussing. Lee?
I think that might be one that Eric's been closer to, actually,
Okay.
over the recent history.
Yeah, so I think even just hearing feedback from end users as they're able to try these things out, and having a great way to get that feedback into the community, so that we even that we're aware of where there are real incompatibilities that we're not aware of. That even is going to be a tremendous help in terms of understanding what the biggest areas are to address as part of this overall build pack transition. I think there's also, we definitely want to see an active community around build packs in general. One of the great things also about cloud native build packs is that it's a lot easier to extend build packs with custom functionality. So they're built to be much more modular and composable in how they operate. And so, for a long time, we've seen folks they'll take the Java build pack, but they need it to run a specific version of the JRE, or they need to inject some other agent. And they've had to do a complete fork of that build pack and then keep it on their own. Now there's a lot more modularity and granularity to how those build packs are composed. So they can actually be able to either just make a little tweak to the definition and rebuild the build pack, or even contribute those things back to the build pack community. So I think we see both of those as being great, important avenues for the community as a whole to get involved much more deeply with build packs.
I think having an open public roadmap and knowing who to contact in order to raise particular issues is also going to help an awful lot, because it's going to enable end users to be able to figure out quite how they're going to undertake the migration themselves and what their key criteria is, and if there is anything that is missing from that key criteria, to either raise it or know roughly when it's coming, so that they can plan work in themselves around that migration and not be surprised by it.
Stephan, what kind of resources are you committing then to the open source project around Cloud Foundry?
So I want to talk just about my team. As I mentioned already, we have seen problems with the cloud controller in our very huge landscapes, because the cloud controller was probably not developed to keep up with such a load. And we started, let's say, mid of last year to open bugs, very simple things. Then you learn, okay, it's not enough to just open a bug. A bug should be well described, reproducible, etc. That's already some work. And then you start to engage on Slack. We recently asked for open office hours, which is a very, very good thing to get into contact with the CAPI team for us. And meanwhile, I would say that my team is dedicating half of our capacity into real contributions into the cloud controller. That is still mostly fixing concrete problems that we have seen by analyzing our load on the big landscapes and optimizing some queries, adding more logging to detect performance bottlenecks upfront, but also new features like the upcoming space supporter role. And that worked out, I would say, pretty well.
When I think about scale, Amelia, I think about Bosch, right? Bosch has been really very effective, and one of the values that Cloud Foundry has had is how well it can support large groups, large teams, and and Kubernetes is a different kind of a challenge. One of the challenges, we're seeing, and I talked about this a bit at the top of the show, is about cluster management. And, it's one thing to manage one cluster and all the communication within that one cluster, and that's been pretty much solved. But now when you're talking about multiple clusters, that becomes a much greater challenge. And there becomes also dependency issues. And we've been hearing a lot about dependency issues all over the tech space, especially now that containers really bring in a whole new types of attack surfaces and such. So I'm curious from your point of view on this networking challenge, that scale challenge, and is that a priority for you in terms of how you think about resilience and how you think about what are the issues that you're facing, and maybe there's priorities you're thinking about? I'm just curious on your take.
Well, from the CF or VM side, I've definitely worked with SAP in the past to make sure that, container to container networking works at, the insane scale that you all work with. Large deployments actually really fascinate me. So I always love when you all talk about the problems that you run into. But on the Kubernetes side, I'll say that's a little bit out of my realm, and I'll let someone else handle that.
Who'd like to talk to that? Lee?
It's an area that we've not really started to explore yet. It's something that we're kicking off. So unfortunately, we don't have the answers necessarily.
Is it a priority?
I think,
or is it not?
It certainly could well be a priority, but it's going to come down to that key bit of user research that we're doing to find out where we need to go in order to make sure that everyone's nice and happy.
What's that research?
So that's what we're kicking off with our tenants, as we call them, our end users. That's starting, well, it's underway now already. So we're talking to people that are currently using our PaaS offering for everything that they're offering. Some people that use it for some things, but not others. And why not the others? What are we missing? And then some people that don't use us at all because something we do, it doesn't meet their needs. And from that, I think we're going to be able to draw out whether it is the right thing for us to do. And it's all got to be the right thing for the right organization at the right time. Because you don't want to rush something in what I would call CV-driven development terms, just because it's the shiny new technology to play with. It's got to be absolutely right for the people that are paying your bills. And it's got to be dependable as well, which is a very key thing. Because nobody wants to be woken up by a platform that falls over.
Stephan, it seems like in many ways your North Star is compatibility. How does compatibility fit with the developer experience, which has always been a North Star, I think, for the Cloud Foundry Foundation?
I mean, compatibility is, from an end user point of view, is I write my application, I have certain tools and pipelines set up how to deploy it, and that is just supposed to work. And please don't disturb me with updates or whatever.
Please don't disturb me. I love that.
That's what the users exist. So when I look back, Cloud Controller, again, there is this V2, V3 topic. The old V2 API, I think it's deprecated in the documentation, but there's still no real deadline about when it's to be removed. And it's also hard work and difficult to announce such a deadline because there are so many tools depending on it. Even the CF CLI still depends on some V2 calls. There are UIs, Stratos, or I guess every bigger company has its own, call it Cloud Cockpit or whatever portal you have. I would be surprised if they are all migrated to V3 already. So this is a huge effort. And there are, from my point of view, always two forces inside. First of all, people think, I stay with the old API. It's working, why touch it? On the other hand, there are new features that are only available in the new API. And at a certain point in time, the developers of the component, for instance, the Cloud Controller, also have to make a hard cut because otherwise innovation stops simply because you are just lost in keeping compatibility, and the maintenance effort increases and increases, and more dead code gets piled up. And to deal with that, to handle with that, you need multi-year roadmaps. You need to communicate very often, and do some steps, bring in some feature flags to switch it off, and there's no easy answer, I would say. And the same will get true if you try to migrate away from a Bosch deployed landscape with certain functionalities to a Kubernetes thingy. The deployment, the sizes will be completely different. We are, let's say, at the moment handling 50 to 100 landscapes, let's say at the brink between pet and kettle somewhere. On Kubernetes, it's clear it's a factor 100 more, and there's no question about there are no pets, period. And all the backplane has to work completely automatic. This is not yet there, I would say. And it's a long roadmap, it's work, it is incremental improvements. And at the end of the day, you have to take your customers with you, and that's the key.
Yeah, and I think this is where we see a lot of activity in the broader Kubernetes and cloud native community. And I don't think it's realistic for the Cloud Foundry community to solve all of these problems that we see coming with Kubernetes, because there's lots of other people thinking about how to manage that, how to do cluster management at scale, how to do cross-cluster networking and service discovery. And where I think we can see a lot of value for Cloud Foundry is in taking those developer experiences and abstractions and bringing them on top of that technological landscape. Just as we did very successfully with VMs using Basha as that very analogous abstraction for declarative infrastructure.
That's clarity for me. That helps me think about the question I asked Amelia, because Amelia, like you're focusing on Cloud Foundry, right? You're thinking about the issues that come with Cloud Foundry, and multi-cluster management is not exactly, something that you're really focusing on. And there's a lot of other people who are focusing on those kinds of things. But Lee, I think you're going to have a lot of fun here with all this. And I think that's important, right? One thing I've always liked about the Cloud Foundry community is there's a familial aspect to it. There's a kind of a community that's really important, and you can spend a lot of time thinking about the compatibility and all these other types of matters. But at the end of the day, the Cloud Foundry community, has a soul, has a belief system. It has some guiding principles. And I guess just in conclusion, what do you want to say to people out there about, who are excited about developer experiences and who want to think about Cloud Foundry and how it intersects with the Kubernetes community? How are you thinking about even working with the Kubernetes community to make it more holistic? Because I think that's one thing that's always the challenge in Kubernetes community and in other communities. And Kubernetes community has done a really good job of it, right? Keeping that holistic approach, but still, very focused on individual projects, which each project almost has its own identity. It has its own kind of perspective. It has its own personality and culture. So, I'm thinking about those things, as we wrap up here.
So we're actually adopting quite a bit from the Knative community. So we're going with a similar kind of role structure, though we've expanded it with what we're calling the everybody role. And the everybody role is there, and so long as you sign the contributor license agreement, you can open your PRs, open your issues, join in with Slack, join in with the conversations and get involved. So that's a bit of a change, but everything we do is around three key principles, and that's transparency, clarity, and inclusivity. So we're making sure that everything's as open, transparent, and clear as we can possibly make it, so that we can actually help the community grow. So we want to make sure that we're open for everybody, from people of SAP and VMware size down to home developers, working away in their bedrooms. And we want to encompass all.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the new working groups. As before there were just project leads. And that's it. And now we have all these other roles. So, I'm always in GitHub and I interact with all of these people and their handles, like Toby from the UK government always sends a bunch of great PRs. We work with him, or we work with Mickey, who's working with SAP right now on tying up those loose ends with, internal TLS. And I'm excited to, hopefully these people will, come in and join roles in the working group, and I'll be able to work closer with them, maybe see them on a screen one day and know what they look like. Yeah, I'm really excited about that.
That's neat. Stephan, how about you?
Yeah, actually, I also have very high hopes into the new working group model, because I simply hope that, let's say in autumn, we have in our team a committer and the cloud controller. That would be really great. And I'm positive about that, because this working group model, it opens up the community. We mentioned that this dojo experience is not there. Project plans, the backlog, etc. They move over to GitHub. We can see that already in this space supporter role implementation that has worked out well. And I think that's a good future.
I mean, there's always an interesting thing that I like to throw in from here that actually we have as a GDS mantra: make things open, it makes things better.
I think one of the one of the important roles that the TOC is going to play here is in setting those baseline expectations around open process and kind of consistency across the working groups, because they'll certainly have their own amount of latitude in determining what kind of process they want to use for the scope of their responsibilities. But we also want to make it easy for someone who's in the community or entering the community to adopt practices, whether that's around GitHub issues and projects as the open mechanism to get visibility into project activity and roadmap, but then to have that be portable across working groups. So, if we've got people from Stephan's team contributing to Cloud Controller, and they realize that, oh, this is also going to require work on the Diego side or the Go Router side, if that lands in another working group, have those same processes be consistent enough so that they feel like they've got a good understanding of how this is all supposed to work as a community.
Well, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to talk. This has been a conversation that I find exciting, just in the fact that we're seeing a new community development push, really, for Cloud Foundry. And from what Amelia, you're saying about the interactions you're having in the community, and Stephan as well, and Lee, the focus on openness, and Erica, just kind of thinking about kind of the the universal group out there. It something I think that'll be fun to watch, and seeing what new projects come out of this. I mean, that's one of the always exciting things for us at the News Stack, is seeing what new projects come out of the cloud native community, for instance, and how that, and because there's new projects that are in development all the time. And perhaps it's another topic we can talk about how you're going to be approaching kind of incubating projects and such like that. We didn't really get into that, so maybe another discussion. So thank you for your time. Oh, and I'll make a little pitch if any of you want to talk about, write a little post for the News Stack about new projects and how you're going to be incubating new projects. We'd love to publish it. So anyone out there in the audience too who wants to write about Kubernetes or and how it intersects with Cloud Foundry, please reach out. Alex at the News Stack. So thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate the time. Amelia, Stephan, Lee, Eric, have a great time in the months ahead.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you,
you.
Thanks, Alex. Great to talk to you.
So welcome to the Q&A portion of the Technical Community Leadership Panel. I think we expect to see Lee join as well. Folks can see I am not Alex Williams from the News Stack, but I'll step in to help, I guess, moderate a bit. I have a couple of questions that I was going to ask the group here, but want to remind people in the audience to feel free to use the chat or the Q&A tab. I don't care which. and just let us know if you've got any questions for the group. So right now, we don't have any questions in there, but I'll throw the first one out here. So this one's a little bit of a softball, and it's nice and vague, right? So the three of you interact with end users of the platform, whether they work inside your company or whether they're customers of your company. So what would you, and this is for each one of you, what is one of the biggest user requests that the community still needs to work on? Just kind of pick one of your favorites. So Stephan, why don't we start with you? Oh man.
Well,
I thought
there are
this was
two types of requests I see. The first one is I need more memory, bigger quotas, more applications. And the second one is why is my deployment so slow? Pipeline, performance, and these are the two things. Everybody expects that it's always working, which is not always the case, but we're doing our best.
So when your users say they need more memory for the applications, is that a constraint of the Cloud Foundry software, or is that a constraint of the size of the machines that the apps are being placed into, capacity there?
It's basically a constraint of Cloud Foundry itself. So we hit the problems on the Diego API, on the Cloud Controller, the amount of VMs that can be handled that is still working out quite well in the Diego cells, but the control plane has its limits here and there. Oh,
I see. I understand. Interesting. Okay, Amelia. So in your space, talking to different customers and end users, what do you see as one of their biggest requests in the domain that you focus on?
Yeah, well, the one that's coming out soon that I talked about is H2, which I'm really excited about. The one that we're just starting to think about, again, is what I'll call dynamic ASGs. And so right now, when you make your application security groups, you have to recreate your apps or restart your apps. And that's because originally when it was made, you create your security group, it goes into CAPI. CAPI passes that information along with the LRP, and those IP table rules get written as part of the container create process. Not because it has to be that way, that's just how it was made, once upon a time. But when you update your ASGs, there's no reason that you have to restart your apps, and it's annoying that you have to restart your apps. And so we're looking at ways how we can treat ASGs much more similarly to how we treat container networking policies right now, because they both turn out as IP tables rules on the cell. But for container networking policies, you create them, a couple seconds later, boom, it works. And so I think that'll be a big win, especially when people change their foundation or wide ASGs. It's changing it everywhere, and you have to recreate every single app in order for them to take place. So I think that's a big one that we're looking into right now. Cool.
All right. So last up, Eric.
Yeah. So I think for the Bosch-based distributions, that doing whatever we can do to increase that speed of operation and that flexibility from the platform operator perspective, that often keeps coming up. That people know that that Basha is still this great system for deploying this complicated set of software to an enormous estate of VMs, but they also, sometimes they run into problems where that could be faster, or where there's some edge case around the declarative structure of Bosch that they've needed to work around, and so continuing to refine that, especially even at the Bosch layer, is certainly coming up as a priority to focus on. And then I think also very broadly, folks are still getting invested in and interested in Kubernetes, and they can all see that potential future for Cloud Foundry on top of Kubernetes, and they really want to understand and start adopting that model for what CF on K8s is going to look like, and hopefully get some more of the clarity in the open source community established and resolved around that.
Yeah, that's certainly one that I hear all the time from users of the open source. It's clearly an area that a lot of the users are interested in, and I would say that One of the things that we've observed is as we've gone and tried to continue to promote the work of the community is that the CF for K8's form factor, and it has its warts, right? It's not the answer to how to get CF on top of Kubernetes. It's one of the current answers, but the fact that it could be really small is proving valuable to small development shops, right? There's an example, one that Ram, one of our developer relations folks, was interacting with. It's a dev shop, based in India, trying to onboard, developers that are maybe right out of school. They were very focused on, developing with Java or other languages, and being able to give them just that really simple deployment experience. With Kubernetes as the underlying infrastructure that their clients are asking for, just solve like a whole raft of developer onboarding problems. So it's going to be interesting to see how the community continues to evolve the current approaches and gets to a point of, I think maybe unification or stabilization of the answer there. Cool. So switching topics, and this may be an interesting one to think through in a little bit of real time here. So one of the things that we observe if you look at the Decatur project, the Open Service Broker API project, although maybe less so there, it's not quite used as broadly as it was at initial launch. These are projects within the CFF that originated as ideas inside of Cloud Foundry, but now are applicable in other places. So I guess I want to get your general thoughts on, are there other components that are applicable in other places that ought to be treated that way? Or are there opportunities for us to start to think about the architecture as more reusable components? So it's just kind of open for anybody. Everybody's just kind of, I don't know.
So mapping out the state of all of the current CF architecture in real time.
Is UAA used somewhere else outside of Cloud Foundry?
It's used, actually, that's another good example. There's a lot of examples of where UAA just as a project is deployed as a workload on top of Cloud Foundry, and then sometimes brokered as a service, right, for apps, and in other cases just kind of deployed as part of an architecture. Stephan, is that something that SAP offers?
Yeah, we offer, we have one UAA that is responsible for the, let's say, platform users. So when you see if push something, and there is another UAA instance, a bigger one that is responsible for handling authorization for application end users. So that's definitely a component that may also be deployed on Kubernetes, I think, without bigger problems.
Cool.
I think one opportunity that's still potentially untapped there is around CRED Hub. Which also fills that more independent place in the architecture. We'd found applications for it in the app runtime, but it's also been optionally integrated with Basha as a way for Basha to delegate a lot of its credential management and generation to a more secure system. And so that may be another area that could make sense as something to break out into a more defined or separate project with more of a life of its own.
Cool. All right, so one more call out to the audience to see if anybody has any questions that they want to ask. I still don't see any in chat or any Q&A. I guess Alex must have asked all the questions that could possibly be asked of you all. So how about this? Here's one. What question should you all have been asked that's this thing that's top of your mind as it relates to the Cloud Foundry community or the technology? Or was Alex exhaustive?
I don't think Alex was exhaustive completely, although he did a great job of covering a lot of the important topics for the community. I think one thing that we'll really be diving into with the TOC is how we can be explicating the details of the community process and the guidance to give to the projects and working groups about really how to have that open, accessible community so that folks know where to get involved, they know how to get started with either using the projects or getting to the point where they can contribute to them and filing issues. And so, that's, as we've said, one of the overall goals for the changes to the community governance model, but really getting the details of that right, and then getting all of the existing components and projects to move in that direction and really to operate in that mode fully is going to be one of the major challenges that we'll be addressing through the new TOC and working group model.
Yeah, one simple question could be, how can I involve myself into such a working group? Where can I apply for getting here? And when is this new model actually in place?
Yep. And as a member of the TOC, your answer would be? How would you answer that question, Stephan?
I would answer it, go to the open PRs that are on the community GitHub project and comment on them. And well, as soon as enough people have contributed, then the new model can start. It depends on the users, on you actually.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, at this point, as Lee mentioned, we're trying to map out the whole structure that's going to encompass the existing activity in the community. And we have some initial ideas about that, but that's where we want to get broad community input.
Cool. So we do actually have a question that popped into the Q&A tab here from Ruben. He says, how will the TOC measure success? And I guess, for Eric and Stephan, your perspective as members of the TOC, and I think, Amelia, what is it as you as a community member, like how do you want them to measure success?
I guess from my level, like a successful working group would be one that has a visible roadmap. I would like to see us use the PR model more so that it's obvious the work that we're doing, and so that people from the community, who aren't working on teams full time can see and comment and know what's going on. And yeah, just more community involvement would always be great.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a few different tiers of success measurement. Among the more foundational is, are we getting the projects and communities to adopt that open process and to make sure that all of that development work and planning is going through the right channels and is transparent to the community and is meeting those inclusivity goals that we have for the overall governance process. And then on top of that, once everyone's moving in that direction and making sure to have all of that process be open, then measuring both the volume and the diversity of contributions in each one of the working groups. Like, we want to make sure that they're all active, that there's an engaged set of participants in each one of them. And I think that's been an issue that we've had with some of the existing project structure in the community, is that at times it's often been so fragmented and granular that it's easy for individual projects to kind of get forgotten or to just to drift off and not get support and not have any resolution around whether they're active, whether they're in a more stable or maintenance mode, or whether they need to be ended completely.
Yeah, I would actually measure it whether we have in a few months a few more, let's say, unknown people in the contributor or even approver role, because that shows that this new model is actually working and that the, let's say, prerequisites that you have to fulfill in order to get in such a role are reasonable chosen.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, so we had one more question pop in. This might end up being the last one to answer here, but so Jim asks, how will the TOC decide what becomes part of the core CF offering and what stays as individual projects, bolt-on extras? And I guess some context I would add to that is that's a bit of a difficult question, right? So what do we mean by core CF? Is that what's released as part of CF deployment? Is that what's released as part of CF for Kates? Or is that some formalized certification definition of what it means to be Cloud Foundry. So I'll just, with that context, maybe throw that out to you. What are your thoughts? How should the community overall, not just the TOC, think about what is CF and how to explain it?
Yeah, so I'll take a crack at that. I think by core CF offering, I'm certainly interpreting that to mean the CF app runtime that we've had, and there, I think that's also where we've had a lot of success defining extension points to build around that core part of the platform. So even things like the Service Broker API and build packs as two very deliberate extension points there. So I think that actually should be one major area of focus for the TOC overall, looking at the app runtime and some of the adjacent projects is where else makes sense for those extension interfaces or modularity points in the overall architecture. And I think that gives us some more definition there around what should be included in that core basic distribution or deployment of Cloud Foundry that the community can provide, and then where either individuals can extend that or even vendors to provide additional value add.
Awesome. All right, so we have 2 minutes left. One other question popped up, and I'll just throw this out there to see what people think. So I believe the name's pronounced either Jovan or Jovan. It's really good to see that there are efforts to reuse some of the ideas and components. I'm paraphrasing. What are we going to do to promote the projects outside of CF that can be reused like that? Outside of the CF focus community. And I guess one thing I would throw out there is I think that this type of question is an easy one to reflect back on the whole community writ large to say, there's a minimum level of promotion that the foundation's designed to support, right? And Paketo is a good example. We've helped promote that, but also using Paketo as an example, the community that builds it has actively gone out to do outreach into other communities in order to see that adoption grow. And the use of Paketo is growing in many other contexts, whether those are Tecton pipelines or just lots of different places where cloud native compliant build packs are able to be used. And that's a really good, strong collection that's well designed. So I think it takes the community itself doing a lot of that outreach. And I think the community is including the users. It's a great way to contribute to the projects themselves. So I don't know, anybody else have any other thoughts on that?
I'm just so happy to see that our newer projects like Paketo are doing that, and going out and being reusable and growing their communities outside of just CF. That's something that we don't really have for Go Routers, Silk right now. And wow, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a bigger community, or thought about that when we were building it. So it's exciting to see from the distance. A little jealousy though.
Well, go ahead, Stephan.
Yeah,
sorry.
the cloud controller probably will not be used that much outside of CF. Yes. It's in the nature of the component, and for other components, that's true as well.
Yeah. But I do think the idea of trying to build things that are a little bit more generally useful is valuable. And then it's sort of the inverse of reusing things that are now well understood and have matured, that have general applicability, and using them instead of building our own. It's always been a trade-off for CF because it's kind of like it's needed to build a bunch of things ahead of the rest of the open source community, and it's been a challenge to, of course, for the community to navigate the choices about when do you build or when do you go and grab another project. So I think we've sort of reached a point where a good chunk of what needs to be under the covers, not all of it, but a good chunk of it, can be put together by looking at more broadly useful projects. And then we also should take that approach in the future. Cool. All right, we are over time. So thanks everybody for joining. Stephan, Eric, and Amelia, thank you very much for popping on for the live Q&A. And I'll sign us off as not Alex Williams. Y'all have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chip.